Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to you. I'm Samina Ali Khan, and I'm delighted to be your host, guiding you through this event. It's also great to have so many of you back with us and to see new faces joining us for the first time. Now, public sector learning and development is being delivered to you by the Public Sector Executive. The day is going to be packed full of opportunities to network and also to acquire current sector knowledge. Now, this could be knowledge that's gained from our speakers or event partners in the digital marketplace. And we would like to thank the industry leaders and all our speakers who are with us today to share their invaluable insights. The content standard on our PSE 365 platform means that all the content is CPD certified. So for every hour of content that you watch live, you will earn 1 CPD point. And to get your certificate, all you have to do, please, is email the PSE team at marketing@cognitivepublishing.com. That's marketing@cognitivepublishing.com. And fingers crossed, they will sort it out. Now, alongside the panel discussions that we have today, we've also got some fantastic networking opportunities for you to enjoy, and that's through our speed networking function. When you collaborate with your colleagues, it's a great source of education, and it also helps to extend the knowledge and the connections that are shared today, which can be accessed anytime, so therefore ultimately growing our PSE 365 community. And on that note, a reminder about our PSE platform. You and your teams can access a wealth of resources as part of our on-demand content alongside the digital marketplace. And of course, we do value your views. Please do feel free to share those thoughts and experiences across socials today. You can use the hashtag. It is PSE365. That's capital PSE-365. And thank you for that. So let's move on to the focus of today. Over the last decade, the public sector, as many of you know, has undergone many changes, and with that has come many challenges. Public sector bodies are expected to continue to modernise, to improve the delivery of services, but that is amidst the staff shortages, budget cuts, recruitment challenges, low morale, which we've all seen, and an overworked workforce. Now, there are currently 1.3 million jobs to choose from in the UK market, and we've got some figures for you to share, which are from the Hayes Salary Guide. They say 71% of public sector employers are currently recruiting. 73% say they don't have access to the skills required to meet their organisation's goals, and 24% are going through a moderate or extreme skills shortage. Training and development of existing staff is a solution, but is it enough to meet the growing needs and to deal with the crisis that's already here? And with the sheer scale of training packages covering frontline to C-suite, how does the public sector choose the right package to meet its training needs? And can it be improved? With digital transformation and the skills gap, is it time for public sector to examine solutions from industry to perhaps deliver the training needed to meet the needs of the present, but also the needs of the future? And given the abundance of outside training providers, should the public sector look more favourably at both in-classroom and also online solutions? There's lots of questions and lots for us to discuss in our first leaders debate, which is called Learning Solutions for Public Sector. As always, we're very pleased to say we have a great panel lined up to answer some of these questions and hopefully give us some food for thought. And our panel for this debate is, we have Councillor Liz Green, who's a trainer and a facilitator in local government at Royal Borough of Kingston upon Thames. Now, for over 20 years, Liz has held many portfolio positions, including council leader and leader of the opposition. We also have Councillor Ian Kirke from Bracknell Forest Council, local government information unit trainer. Ian is a proud dad. He's a Notts County fan. He's an elected member for Bracknell Forest Council, former senior police officer, an educationalist, a journalist, and a feature writer. And we also have Sonia Pawson, who's the Director of Government Skills and Curriculum Unit for the Cabinet Office. Now, Sonia is responsible for providing strategic leadership and management of training across the civil service and the delivery of early centralised talent programmes, including the award-winning Civil Service Fast Stream. So welcome to all of you, to Liz, to Ian, and also to Sonia. As always, we would welcome our questions from you, the audience. We'd love to include you in the conversation. So please use the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to get some of those questions included in the discussion in the next half hour or so. So let's start off then. Liz, firstly with you, what is the most important, or what are the most important skills for councillors?
Thanks very much, Sonia. So I think there's a lot of concentration in local government on the skills that councillors need on the services, so planning, regulation, training, licensing, adult social care, safeguarding children, which is all important. But I feel what's possibly missing is the softer skills. So if you're a councillor, you may well be chairing a meeting with 50, 100, 150 residents who frankly are baying for your blood because you're making a highways decision that they dislike. And that is a very different scenario to normal chairs training, because the public are there, because the public is a heated discussion and debate. But also councillors as politicians, because most of us are part of a political party, social media, it seems to be the way that people think that they can just attack us, that we're not people. We're seen as this, awful group of individuals. So I think there's also training that is needed for councillors on how to manage that. And then their council work-life balance. So most councillors actually have jobs as well, because they need to earn a living, and our allowances are not at the level where it allows you to do that most of the time. So that balance between normal work and life and then add in council, it can become very difficult. And we have dropout rates really high of good councillors, particularly young councillors who are trying to sustain their careers as well. So I think that's, for me, some of the key skills that councillors need.
Okay, well, you certainly touched on quite a range there, and we'll come back to some of those points as well. But I know you mentioned the softer skills as well, which you thought perhaps were the one thing or one area that perhaps there was more training required. Sonia, I just wondered, what approach is the civil service taking to ensure that there is relevant and evolving training on offer?
Yeah, thank you. So we've reached a milestone actually in central government. So 2 years ago, we set up a new government campus and launched a curriculum. And I can tell you a little bit more about that. But basically, we set out to develop a new approach designed for the new challenges, as you mentioned before. And really what we are aiming to do is close the gap between specialist skills, but also the provision of core skills. And I think you're speaking to the softer skills there, really improve the leadership and management skills with a greater emphasis actually on the basics of good line management. So the approach that we're taking is simply a commitment across the whole of government to develop the knowledge, the skills, the networks. And I think this commitment is coming right from the top down. So ministers, the cabinet secretary, all agree that we need to be utterly committed to investing in better training, better learning and development, and a genuine approach to high quality training. So the approach that we've taken really is bringing together all of the areas responsible for delivering training across government, whether that be provided centrally or designed and delivered by the professions, functions and departments across government, and recognising that we need to have an approach that is both virtual and physical, so that there can be a kind of hybrid approach to learning where relevant.
So how far along is that commitment? I know you said it's coming from the top down, but how what's the progression?
Yeah, well, we've made great progress actually over the last, like I say, 2 years. We have Well, the challenge that we had, we defined some problems that I guess are relevant to many organisations. But the main question was, we asked ourselves, is it possible to make a common cause, a common purpose between people doing such varied jobs? So you can imagine the whole civil service workforce, some 460,000 plus strong. But it is possible. So what we have done is define a common set of core knowledge, skills and networks. We're being precise and kind of adding specificity in terms of that curriculum. And we know that it matters to define that, because where people have competence, we build confidence. Where we build broad and deep networks, and we know people are more effective across a complex system. So we've developed many products over the last 2 years, but I just wanted to say what we have done is define a common curriculum. So whether that be for school leavers coming into the organisation or executives coming into the top, we know and we've defined what good looks like working across government. We've defined 5 core strands. Just in a nutshell, we have strand 1, which is the foundations of public administration. So the kind of things there that anyone needs to know when joining a big organisation, kind of the basics in budget management, like I say, people management, project management. Strand 2 is all about what's different about working in government. So what do you need to know about the union, the constitution, local government, and so on. Strand 3, you'll be pleased to know, is a focus on leadership and management. So some of those softer skills and getting those basic foundations right. And then recognising that this is just not an endeavour for HR professionals. Strand 4 is where we work with the specialists, the professions, where some of our critical skills come in, like digital, data, science, technology. And then our final strand, strand 5, is the domain specific knowledge and skills needed, and for example, whether working in education, welfare, defence, climate, and so on. And across all of those strands of the curriculum, we've got very clearly defined, right from foundation to expert training, and an L&D offers.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sonia. Ian, in your opinion, do you think the in-house training departments do use trusted educational practices and they're effectively developing staff?
Well, I wonder, Samina, before I answer that one, I've been making loads of notes on what Liz and Sonia have made. If I've be permitted just to contribute to those, because they're wonderful. I think one issue is for me, what I hear from Sonia is a great trajectory. That's where we want to be. But I come back to Liz's point that when I was elected, very process driven. There's little, if anything, about managing people's expectations, about dealing not only with the perhaps assault on our character, but the stress responses that we have and how we actually deal with that. And I thought to myself, is why do part it? Their staff retention. I know they're all sort of shareholders within the company, but the training is a very, very important part of that in terms of identifying potential and keeping those people engaged and giving a great service. But to answer your specific question, Samina, I'm going to have to come from my experience as an elected member, and I'm going to have to say, sadly, no. Many hosts from my experience are often content matter experts, albeit they have a sporadic or non-existent facilitation skills. And I think the transference of professional knowledge is therefore significantly undermined, since usually one of the 3 learning domains is engaged with, often the cognitive, which is the thinking part. And presenters will often choose their own dominant learning style, thereby lessening the educational experience of up to 3/4 of the audience. So I think I've seen a lot of evidence of exclusion within our training products, and I'd like to see that reshaped and readdressed.
Okay, so in what way? I know you said you'd like to see it reshaped and redressed. So what specifically do you want to see happen?
I think that there is very often an issue, licensing, for example, which is very legal. Taxi. I mean, I went to a presentation on new taxi legislation, and it went on for 2.5 hours, and there was no break, and it was just PowerPoint. And I'm sure 3/4 of the audience, although had logged in, had really gone out to, walk the dog. It was as engaging as maybe somebody watching Notts County who's not a Notts County fan. It's all about, there are many elected councillors that time is very, very important. And I've heard it before, but we don't want any breaks. We don't want any lunch. We want to finish early. Now, for the activists in the room, that's great. Yeah. But for the reflectors, you end up, disengaging. So the answer for me is whoever we have front of screen doing the training has got to have some training skills. Not just that they were, ex-police and they can talk about interviewing till the cows come home. They've got to have some way of, giving that professional knowledge in a way that the learners are going to learn rather than just listening to their voice.
I've got to bring Liz in at this point because she was nodding, but equally, I'm sure that she'll have some opinion on what you're saying as well. So, Liz, what do you think? I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it, what Ian's saying? But in practice, it doesn't often work, does it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely relate to what Ian is saying. And it's the skills of the people doing it, they're so engrossed in their planning or licensing or whatever it is, that they don't know how to get it across. I've had some really good training as a councillor, and I will say that the LGIU, that both Ian and I do some training with, and the LGA do excellent training. And there are other organisations out there that do as well. But what they don't do is really develop the person. So Sonia was talking about the leadership and management as one of the key themes. It's very limited, the amount of leadership and management. Now, as a councillor, what you're responsible for is your place. So your ward, your division, the area you represent. But you don't actually have authority over most of the people most of the organisations that influence that. So the police, the health service, the businesses, the voluntary sector, you have no authority. So you've got to learn influencing skills to work in a collaborative partnership way with those organisations that are key to developing your area, making it the area that everyone wants it to become, where people want to live there and work there and what have you. But these influencing skills and those management skills, and they are different for councillors, or I would say MPs, to those that work within the offices. So the officers of the council or the civil servants of central government. So I think too much emphasis, there isn't enough emphasis, I should say, not too much, because we need to raise up to the level that often civil servants and officers receive. It needs to be on those skills for councillors. There's 17,000 councillors across the country, and that doesn't even include town and parish councillors. That's just the bigger ones. So there's a lot of us out there doing it, and it's time that we had that professional development that is taken for granted, I think, particularly in the private sector, but also in the public sector in other ways. But the other thing I just wanted to very quickly touch on, which might be of interest to Sonia and Ian particularly, is the officers that work and the staff that work in the whole public sector need to understand they work in a political environment. And that is often lacking, that they understand they work in a political environment. And I hear quite often, health, education, they shouldn't be political. They are political. Like it or don't like it, they are political. Work with your political partners at a local level or national, but particularly at a local level. It will help you get things done and understand you're in a political environment. And I don't see that training of staff about the politics. It's not something that Sonia mentioned, and yet every civil servant needs to know they work in a political environment.
Yeah, and as you quite rightly say, cross-party training perhaps is something as well that needs to be considered, doesn't it? I'll let Sonia and Ian come back in on that specific point, because I think from what you're saying, there's a lot of training required around public facing and those councillors who are having to deal with the public a lot. But equally, what you were saying as well about the political side, I think that's an interesting aspect. So Sonia and Ian, do you want to come back on that? And then we've got questions already coming in from the audience, so I'll go to those. So just Sonia, if you want to go first on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think quickly to say, sorry if I wasn't specific enough, but our strand 2 of the curriculum is just tailored to that. You know, what is it that people need to know about working in government, working with ministers, working, you know, kind of in a politically charged environment. So, you know, that is the offer is tailored to the role, whether that's in Parliament, in public finances, in local government. But these, I think, I'd agree, these are skills that are, you know, can be undervalued. But what we do know, and we know from our research, is we need to equip all our civil servants with the skills to know how to get things done in a political, very, you know, complex system, how to work with political colleagues, how to give advice, how to weigh up the legitimate but compelling pressures. And, you know, that's at all grades, whether that be, you know, kind of a junior official or whether it be more senior. But, you know, and we're using quite a lot of the case method approach so that we can train and teach people, you know, what is it like when you're in daily meetings with ministers, for example, making real-time decisions. But they're the skills that I think historically the training focus hasn't been there. So hopefully that gives a bit of reassurance.
Okay. And Ian, do you want to quickly come in there? And then I am going to go to the
very
question.
much so. I want to turn Lizzie's comment slightly on its head, because I think she raises a very important issue about the political landscape. I remember the first time as an elected councillor, I sat in the chamber, and I'd been given evidence as a senior officer at you know, a lot of Crown Court, and I felt it more adversarial in there than in Crown Court. And afterwards, you know, I saw evidence of some quite awful communication between political partners, and all I was told was, that's politics. Well, that isn't. That's people being rude and not developing good communication strategies. I want people to be thinking about that. You know, we need to work on that. We need to look at what good communication skills can I have to you know, lessen my passion, increase my listening skills, all those softer skills that Liz mentioned there. But I think we get drawn into, well, that's just politics, and I think that's rude, and it doesn't get anyone anywhere if we collaborate like that.
Yep. No, I think a lot of people, well, we were all nodding. I'm sure our audience were as well, and agree with you. There is a big difference, isn't there, between just being rude, adversarial, and actually having a discussion. Let's go to our questions, because they are coming in. This one is from Emily Anthony, and she says, in terms of leadership training, where does emotional intelligence and also EDI come into that? Would that be included in strand 5? I think that's your strands, Sonia, and how is this rolled out?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And what we kind of identify is that there's a golden thread of skills that run through everything that we do, but the emphasis on kind of knowing oneself and knowing how we impact as leader really comes into the strand 3. So that the leadership and management training, whether that be kind of there are different levels depending on the workforce segmentation, but that those kind of softer elements, what I would call, come into the strand 3.
Okay. I think that's really fired up the audience this morning, the different strands, because we've got another one about one of the strands. And this is, where does other learning methods come into your curriculum? Coaching self-learning, learning on the job, and that is from Katrina.
Yeah, and again, that's kind of a wraparound, I'd say, learning on the job. So we operate broadly, if those who are familiar with the 70-20-10 model, so recognising that 10% of learning will be formal training, but the majority of learning is done on the job. And so that's kind of a common thread in terms of learning approach. We're doing lots of work at the moment to equip our, let's say, for example, our line managers of apprentices, of graduates, to really understand what our commitment is as good employers to really enable learning, and we're doing lots of things around learning agility, thinking around learning agility and how to create a kind of an organisational growth culture in terms of learning.
Okay, so it's definitely involved, and it's certainly in there. Ian, I just wondered, because you mentioned it about learning from industry and upskilling and delivering the training. What can we take from industry? What can the public sector learn from industry in that way? And should they be doing more?
The simple answer is, of course. I think the pandemic encouraged the new virtual ways of delivering training, and many private enterprises have shown great versatility and skill in maintaining essential development that had hitherto been classroom based, without losing the impact and maintaining the desirable behavioural and knowledge based outcomes. I mentioned John Lewis earlier on. I make no regrets for coming back to that as a good example. They had a very enhanced duty management programme, which they ran essentially in London and at their Bracknell base. And that was managers coming down to Bracknell and the London bases to do their duty management training. But the whole of that was transferred to a facilitated event, which was delivered via Zoom. Now, there was quite a bit of tug back from quite a few senior people within the partnership that would lose the vibe of a classroom-based activity. But they were really encouraged to look at what were the learning outcomes, because I think very often we look at a course, and if I'm designing a course, I start at the end and then work backwards. What do you want to change? What knowledge do you want to transfer within this with your learning objectives, and work backwards? And by adopting that sort of process, this essential part of the management development was embedded totally online and continues to be delivered that way. And with a robust evaluation process, John Lewis see no way they'll ever go back to that classroom-based activity. So there are some good examples. And I think that perhaps those good examples are good ways of sort of just changing the thinking sometimes. I often think in public service, it's a bit like an oil tanker and takes a far more time to sort of make those turns, when private sectors tend to do it a little bit faster.
Liz, what's your thought on learning from industry, and certainly what are the things that you think we could take away, the quick wins perhaps in some respects?
I think we can learn a lot, and I think it's interesting because counsellors come from all backgrounds. So you will have had people who have had careers in every industry that is possible. Will be a counsellor somewhere in the country. I will guarantee it. What we tend to do is forget what it was that people did before. Maybe they've retired now, or maybe they do it part-time, or maybe they do it full-time still. And we're not using those skills in our councils because they're not council skills. And I think Ian's right. We can learn from that. You have to go through a development stage as a councillor. You have to learn to have some patience, because everything takes 10 times as long in government when you're spending public money than it does if you were in a private business necessarily. But actually the other way works as well. So we do need to use those the councillors can help the whole public sector to do that. So we can be used in different ways. We don't have to just be considered political or party political. We are political beings, but we are not necessarily, we are more than that as well, I suppose is what I'm trying to say. We are more than just the party that we got elected for. And I'm not sure that that's always recognised by other people in the public sector.
Okay. Sonia, we've got another question for you. It's just gone, just bear with me. Right, it's, here we go. Sonia, what was your approach to developing, I keep losing my place on that question, just bear with me. What was your approach to developing this curriculum, and how long did it take? I see huge value in doing this, but also believe it requires skills to develop a framework which adds value, striking the balance between developing a curriculum which is reliable, but also not so detailed that it can't be sustained or kept up to date. So I think the basic question was, what was your approach to developing the curriculum?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, like I say, we had existing teams in working in the Centre of Cabinet Office. We brought the teams together and we, as you would hope, took an evidence-based approach. So developed, used the theory of change, developed a set of problem statements, did a capability review, and all of that evidence together then shaped and influenced the design of the curriculum. We didn't do that in isolation. It was a large endeavour working across the civil service with the functions, professions, and departments to test out. And we obviously used specialist skills and expertise in L&D, training, design, and so on, occupational psychologists. So we're iterating now the curriculum as we go, but it took us about a year in all, to gather the evidence, to test out, and before we kind of put up our a statement on gov.uk. But we're now continuing to, like I say, iterate. Evaluation's very important, thinking about training efficacy, how we measure impact and so on. So it's an ongoing piece. I think Ian talked about the trajectory. We've been on a steep trajectory. We're kind of embedding now, but to the point around relatable, we need simplicity. That's what we always thought, and I think our 5 strands gives that simplicity and speaks to everybody.
And you're happy it covers the range, the diversity of the workforce, the different needs. You're happy with that?
Yes. So we talked about, I said, how do you do this across a huge organisation with such a variety of job types and specialist skills and so on. But yes, because the way that we've defined we've kind of used concrete, not abstract terms, being specific and precise. But then within each of the strand sits the kind of the detail which is necessary for each of the different operating contexts.
Okay, a very quick question. I'm going to give this to you, please, Ian. It's come in. It's from Joyce, and it says, what can be learned from the charity sector? How can local authorities and others help them learn?
I think
it's a good question, isn't it? Same sort of thing, public money.
Going back to a point that Sonia raised, that learning is all around us. And to have those discussions, and I think that it takes guts for anyone to knock on a door and get elected. And it goes back to Liz's point, there's talent all around us. And within the charity sector, I would say that's a rich element to mine, because budgets are limited. People are doing it out of the goodness of their own heart a lot of the time. And we could find an awful lot. I think that I have struggled. On one hand, I worked with some big organisations that have got some big learning opportunities, but it's because I'm a backbencher, know your place. And I think we need to have a skills audit within elected members if you are put in positions of, influence over learning rather than longevity. It's what you bring to the equation, and that's something that I think culturally we really need to break through in the public arena.
Okay, Katrina has sent a question in. Liz, let's let you have this one. It's what resources are needed for transferring from classroom to virtual? And I guess, are there enough is the other side to that, isn't there?
I'm probably least qualified to answer that question, to be honest, because I tend mostly to work for other organisations who set up the things and the resources. However, it's interesting. I've just launched a confidence course for councillors, improving your self-confidence. And I've launched that with a colleague of mine and online as a short online course for councillors. And it's been really a steep learning curve in terms of the technology. This is obviously major platform stuff. Ours is not quite at this level. But I think my experience of doing online stuff to the virtual world, the e-learning stuff now is absolutely fantastic, the way it takes you through. The fact that you can do it in your own time and you haven't got to sit there and worry about how you're doing it. But others may have a lot more insight into that classroom to online.
Okay. Sonia, do you want to answer that? About transferring the sort of resources that are needed, transferring from classroom to virtual?
Yeah, it's been quite interesting, actually. What we've found through some of our delivery is actually more resource intensive delivering virtually than in the classroom, in terms of getting the logistics and the organisation right. But I think building on Liz's point, what is really necessary is kind of giving opportunities for the bite-sized learning. I think, building up, I think I saw one of the comments, a modular approach. So it kind of, you don't get the saturation from kind of being online all the time. You get opportunity and space for the discussion and networking. But I guess what we found really helpful is just that constant evaluation, looking at the reaction level feedback and tweaking, because we know that people learn in different ways, so kind of having as much flexibility as possible, but following up, measuring, and not making assumptions about what's working well and what isn't.
Okay, we've got less than a minute, so a very quick question to all of you, and just a couple of lines from each of you, please. We started off, we're talking about learning solutions for the public sector. For each of you, what do you want to see happen and when, in a couple of sentences? Ian, let's start with you, please.
I think an attitudinal change with some people in member development, that it's not all about process, and get the right facilitator in a virtual room. Magic can still happen online.
Brilliant, thank you. Liz?
I think Ian summed it up very well there. I think in addition to that, what I'd say is that we need to make sure that we're treating members and the whole public sector and understanding the context in which it's operated in a way that hasn't been there before and often isn't there, so that we can, and I include with the public sector, the voluntary sector as well, so that we can all actually learn from each other. And that networking is so important, that you'll pick things up from different people, but we tend to go councillors here, voluntary sector there, public, local government there, health there, and actually let's bring us all together.
Okay, thank you. Sonia, final couple of sentences, I guess, from you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm really all for the kind of multidisciplinary team-based learning. What I'd like to see is, good access, good signposting to learning and development. So, at the touch of a button, people know what's relevant for them, when, and how, how to access. And that, like I say, is a mix of bite size. And then there's a real understanding of how learning happens day to day. I often hear people think that learning is just about the formal training, and there's a mindset shift that's needed. And of course, I've mentioned it before, but the commitment to robust evaluation, I think it's all too often missed, and that's the real critical factor.
Brilliant. Okay, we will leave it there. We've got 2 seconds. So on that note, Liz, Ian and Sonia, thank you all for joining us this morning. And thank you, audience, as well, for your questions too. That's our first panel then, kicking off the day with great conversation. You'll be very pleased to know we've got a very quick break now. And if you be able to chat with some of the things over some of the things you've already heard today. So we'll see you back here at 10:40 for our next discussion. Thank you.